We're not talking politics here in the sense of swaying votes or anything like that. I'm just speaking purely descriptively here because this is a comment that Nathan made, and I thought it was very interesting. He said, how long before we have a comedian for a president? Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
And I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
So what do we call traditional media sources these days? I've heard them referred to as legacy media, and usually now mainstream. That phrase is not being mainstream. Yeah, well, mainstream is the ultimate insult these days.
Yeah, now it
didn't used to be, by the way. Right, that's a mark of our changing times. So we want to talk about that a little bit because behind it, part of what we try to do with Thinking Out Loud is we try to consider, I think, what Nathan and I would see as symptoms, outworkings of something deeper. And so traditional media being so distrusted and other forms of media, I'll give some specific examples here in a second, replacing them is a symptom of something deeper. And we want to talk about that in this particular episode. But in recent weeks, think about two of the most politically significant interviews were from Theo Von. I don't know how Nathan, you know how many millions Theo Von's podcast is racked up on that interview. Is it like 7 million or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably more than that. But the operative point we want to point at is it's at least double that anything CNN is doing. So regardless of what the actual numbers are, the relative numbers are what's shocking here.
Right. And of course, Theo Von he's big, but he's nowhere near as big as Joe Rogan, who still kind of rules the podcast sphere and has obviously made headlines recently for interviewing presidential candidate Donald Trump. But he's been trying to get an interview with Kamala Harris and she's turned him down every time. Yeah.
Well, but I'm saying, and he's a little bit of a latecomer to this because I think in the last 6 weeks, lots of comedians. So it'd be Theo Von, Andrew Schultz. And then Kamala's been doing this too on a variety of podcasts. So Rogan was really kind of like a holdout. He is the biggest name in this game still. But the political campaign has been recognizing that podcasts have much broader reach than a lot of whatever you want to call legacy or mainstream media does. So, I mean, you can hear it. Who was joking about this the other day? Maybe a Bill Maher or somebody was asking him, who do you think has a bigger reach, Wolf Blitzer or Ben Shapiro? I mean, and it's laughable. It's easily not Wolf Blitzer. So
not even close. Yeah.
Not even close. Yeah. So this is the new, I guess we've seen this coming, but this is kind of the new normal for reaching people. But it has some very different structure and feel to it than what your grandparents consider to be good media.
Well, that's what we want to start with, I think. So it's lack of formal qualities. Now let's just get this out of the way. Somebody like Theo Von, who I'm ashamed to say it, I remember Theo from Real World Road Rules Challenge from a different world when Cameron was very captivated by all the non-music programming on MTV. But that's a different story. But when his star was on the rise, I had friends texting me different segments, and I thought, wait, is this that Theo? And they're like, oh yeah, don't you know? So that struck me as very funny. I just couldn't believe it. But the lack of these guys have high production values. Of course, they have really great equipment and all of that. But that's not what I mean when I say a lack of formal qualities. They don't come with the kind of prepackaged sound bites that you generally will get on MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, you name it. Where these carefully controlled segments with, everything is very strictly following a programming schedule, all that sort of thing. And it's all sorts of, experts, quote unquote, sounding off. Here, the conversation is informal and it's not structured. And Nathan, I want to get you to comment on this a little bit. You and I both, because we're public speakers, hear a lot about dwindling attention spans. People will say, well, I don't know where this, I know people are getting this figure from somewhere, but they'll say, well, the average, you can lose people in 30 seconds or less at this point. So, you need to be to the point, really to the point. Maybe cut your talk down to 15 minutes or something like that. Look at a TED Talk format. That's a really wonderful formula for reaching people. And yet, these guys seem to say otherwise. These podcasts swell to beyond 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours, and people want it. And you'd also bring in other people. These guys are not in the political conversation, but the Jordan Petersons and others with these YouTube channels. These conversations are lengthy and sometimes very substantive and meaty as well. And people are gobbling it up. I'm curious about your read on that, Nathan.
So a couple things here. One is that I think there was a time in which, so I can think through my grandparents, like, oh, it's time to sit down and watch the evening news. So you have a time in the evening when your favorite, whoever comes on and they kind of give you the summary of the day, local and regional and national, global news. It was something that you intentionally sought out at a specific time and did it. I don't know if anybody's like, I think I'm just going to sit down and listen to a podcast. So a podcast is something that you fit into something else you're doing. You're washing the dishes, you're cleaning the bathroom, you're driving on a long trip, you're plugging this in. It's sort of like constructive background noise for a lot of people. So I think there's a bit of a difference there, where a TED Talk, you have an actual audience who has to sit there and stare at you for 15 minutes. With a long form podcast interview, it's, the dog barks, your kids cry, you're just kind of letting it roll and you're weaving in and out of it as you go along. So there's something both and about this, that, yeah, we certainly don't mind long form content that holds our attention. We're fine with that. On the other hand, I don't think we're consuming it as the exclusive thing at any given point. We're building an airplane model while we're listening to this kind of thing, which is fine. I mean, so on certain types of information, but by and large, I think, so you were talking about like production costs of some of these podcasts, and a lot of them are done by comedians or people who are actors or have other very public platforms, and they're gifted at practicing stuff that sounds like it's spur of the moment, but is actually highly cultivated and highly crafted to come across as conversational. So, I mean, there's production to this. We know that. But if you wanted to look at the cost per view for Joe Rogan versus MSNBC, it's laughably different. What I'm curious about, though, is this signaling a thing where we would rather hear somebody talk and get to and get the illusion or actual some reality into what is this person actually like as a human outside of their carefully crafted soundbite. So you'll see these long form podcast guys get criticized, the Lex Freemans, whatever, for like, oh, you had this person on here who's an expert in this, and you didn't even ask him about XYZ. And like, actually, they were more curious about other stuff in these people's lives than the thing that they're famous for. So I think we do have that craving for, can we start to do something that approximates getting to know the human behind this idea or this influencer or something? I see it as a positive craving for the grappling with the tangible nature of what that human is like, aside from their carefully crafted public persona.
Yeah, I've come back to this a number of times here. I have not been able to get this tweet from Susanna Black Roberts out of my head. She writes for Plow magazine. I believe actually she's one of the staff writers there. She's a very insightful thinker. And I won't get her precise phraseology correct here, but she said something to the effect of, the great challenge of our age is going to be the attempt to be fully human. And that seems to be the intense thirst, because I mean, more and more of what so you have two things, you have several things going on at once. You have a technological kind of acceleration that's happening at an unprecedented rate. That word is overused, but here it is applicable. We're moving so fast with so many of our technological advancements. And so you have that happening, and then you've got increasing loneliness and feelings of isolation in a highly connected world, because the connection that we're experiencing for many people is fairly superficial. In fact, in some cases, it's downright artificial. I mean, it's very strange, Nathan, to see. I've already seen this in my feed, for instance, on Instagram, advertisements for different AI chatbots that you can sign up with. One was called Your High School Rival. I remember that one pretty well. And the more you talk to this bot, the more it latches onto your phraseology and all that. It becomes better at, it's a pattern recognition technology, so it becomes better at giving you a kind of imitation of a real conversation. But it's not real. So you have that. That's just a tiny little picture of what is happening on a massive scale. So there's this increasing hunger for real human connection. And we've talked before, Nathan, about how in ministry settings now, or outreach settings, when we're speaking, the questions really turn more on who are you rather than what do you think. At least I find that people often, if I go straight, if it's straightforwardly, oh, here are my thoughts on this, people almost are not interested at all. But if it's connected personally to my biography, or if it's an outgrowth of my own personality, and they see that, then they are interested. They want an actual connection with the person. And so, yes, it makes sense when you have,
Well, I just want to say, so I think through your more recent speaking engagements. If somebody asks, "What do you think about?" the first question they ask you is not their actual question. The first question they're asking you is, "What do you think about?" to listen to your answer, to try to understand who you are, to decide if you're the type of person who can answer the next question. I know that sounds a little convoluted, but
right.
But that question, "What do you think about?" is a framing device that they're using to try to kind of grapple with how you're oriented toward some form of reality that they know something about, in order to establish whether or not you're an authority who has something meaningful to say on the next question. So, I'm with you on that the questions are really about, even if they are using the phrase, "What do you think about?" or "What would you say to?" those are questions that they aren't using that question to engage with the idea. They're using the idea in order to figure out who you are as an individual. And then it goes on from there.
Well, I mean, and we're not talking politics here in the sense of swaying votes or anything like that. I'm just speaking purely descriptively here, because this is a comment that Nathan made, and I thought it was very interesting. He said, "How long before we have a comedian for a president?" We're certainly trending in that direction. As many people would say, well, we've already had a reality star for a president.
Well, Schwarzenegger in California.
You have
this
Trump.
Isn't that new.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, well, and of course we've had a famous actor for a president as well, Ronald Reagan. People forget about his Hollywood career, but with Donald Trump, and of course you have The Apprentice and all of that. But what's interesting here, if we just take the two candidates right now, and again speaking just purely descriptively, not pejoratively of either at this point, you have Donald Trump, who has more of a populist appeal, and that's and he's run with that. So it's no surprise that he's the one who will sit down with Joe Rogan, for instance. Whereas Kamala Harris, it has to my mind at least, and I think a lot of people would agree, a fairly carefully curated and maintained image. So when she's prepped for something, think about, so when she debated Donald Trump, she went in there and she was very prepared at that point. But she's not good in informal settings, and she's not good off the cuff. Donald Trump, I don't know if I would say he's necessarily good when he's off the cuff. I would say he's comfortable speaking off the cuff and being in informal settings. And so does that give you a political advantage? It does these days. Yes. So there was a time, and this is just, I'm saying this to talk about the changing kind of social dynamics of our cultural moment. But there was a time where people admired qualities like gravitas or statesmanship. That's not a word you hear very often anymore, particularly in a politician. Somebody who had a real seriousness to them, just a person who kind of commanded that sort of respect, carried themselves with a real air of grace. Now, Nathan, and this is me being a little speculative, I'm truly thinking out loud, I suspect that those sensibilities would meet with suspicion today, because people would feel like they don't know who you are, and they would see that as some kind of affront or some a carefully curated image. Whereas they would trust the person who's a little bit more informal, maybe a little bit more clumsy in an interview, but they feel like they know you. You sit down with them, you think, I could sit down and I could have a drink with this guy. I don't know. That kind of dynamic has only people, again, I see that as a manifestation of the intense desire for realness in a person. I think in the past people would use the word authenticity a lot, and I just don't want to get on that bandwagon. I think that word was so overused. But I think it had to do with people want real connection with somebody, even if it's somebody who's just droning on while they scrub a toilet. Somebody who they feel like they know, they care, who they could connect with. I think that's become way more prevalent, and now it's a distinct advantage for you if you want to get ahead in any kind of political office, or if it's going to be a mark of success if you have that more informal approach, I think.
So this is one of those, you're talking about the acceleration of technology where it's outdone itself and starts to kind of like cannibalize itself in that. Okay, so probably one of the fakest things on TV is I would say the fakest thing on TV is a reality TV show.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, isn't that a funny sentence to say, that we use the word reality TV in something that we all know is totally. So there's a way in which we've become a caricature of ourselves when it comes to communication, in a way that I think you're exactly right. Trump could sit down and say goobery things for 2 hours, but people say, that sounds like a human. And we would rather have somebody who we disagree with who sounds like a human than somebody that seems kind of an unknown behind a well-polished box, just because historically that category was respected. But I think we've just had so many scandals and so much comes to light of, this person that we thought had a carefully crafted, wonderful public-facing image now turns out that they were, killing baby alligators with the hammer. I don't know. Like, I'm just making stuff up. But, it's like, I think in a scandal rich culture, the people who have the carefully crafted personas seem to be those who are actually hiding something, not those who are doing a public service. So I want to move in the direction of how does the church communicate then in this atmosphere? But I'm like, okay, two things. Is this just us getting old, Cameron? Or so the whole like AI chatbot thing, we can laugh about that, but it's there and people are using it. So are we breaking ourselves into, is our culture stratifying into categories of quick communication versus a longing for deeper relationship? And how well do we think we have to know somebody before we can trust what they say? That seems to be where I find myself operating.
Okay, I want to respond to that in a second, but can I bring in, at the cost of being distracting, one more example of two past presidents who I think illustrate, once again, this changing social dynamic. So Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy, both. So when analysis of their original, presidential run, when they were debating, a very famous analysis of it was that in the radio interview, Nixon was clearly the superior debater, and he was seen to have won by a landslide. When the two of them were seen when it was televised, in a televised event, John F. Kennedy is a Kennedy. He's good looking. He was charismatic. And Nixon he kind of had a 5 o'clock shadow. He looked kind of creepy. And so the public image thing really worked against him there. And of course, what's interesting is that both of these presidents were then, behind the scenes embroiled in scandal and tragedy. And of course, Nixon, was embroiled eventually in the Watergate scandal. But here's another little fact I want to bring in about former President Nixon, was that when it came out, certain recordings leaked out, and I'm not talking about Watergate here, but that he actually had he swore like a sailor. Did you know that, Nathan?
Nope. Didn't know him.
Yeah, no. So he had, I didn't know him either, but he had this reputation among his colleagues. I mean, but eventually some of those recordings made it out. I mean, he when he was especially stressed, he would swear like nobody's business. And when that came out, that was received as a real scandal. It was, how could this is not befitting of a man in such an important office to be talking like that. So just a sign of how much things have changed. I think nowadays, though, if when a presidential candidate or a president swears, it's seen as endearing. Oh, it's very human. So another picture of the changing social dynamic and how we look at any kind of sort of public figure these days. Those informal qualities and yeah. But back to your question. So there was a really interesting little segment on Rod Dreher's Substack where he shared an email from somebody who finally said, all right, I'm paraphrasing though, of course, but it was just, I'm done with evangelicalism. This is it. And this is the last straw. The last straw was AI and the excitement and enthusiasm for AI. And so what this gentleman said was, he wasn't leaving the faith altogether. He was in the process of becoming Eastern Orthodox. Rod Dreher himself is Eastern Orthodox, as many of you will know. But and then he shared an ad for Logos software that's using AI to help you, help in quotes, with your sermon. So this AI software will generate illustrations for you. It'll give you prompts. It'll basically, a critic might say, essentially write the sermon for you. And so he pointed out something that I thought was fairly haunting. He said, so many evangelicals or really just kind of theologically conservative Christians in North America are so terrified of being left behind in culture because they're still operating with this whole model of, well, we have to engage culture and mobilize people and reach them and just win them over, that they unthinkingly and unreflectively just embrace just about anything that's gotten massively popular. And he said, I want something with depth. I want something with roots. And I want something that's the antidote to that, something that's an alternative to it. I thought we could talk about that a little bit too, because that has a bearing here as for us as Christians and how we respond to that. I think it also has a bearing on are we just getting old? Because I think part of what Nathan and I have been saying for many, many years on the Thinking Out Loud podcast is that, and you have to take this, we can qualify it, but really we've been saying Christ, his word, and his people are all that we need for our cultural engagement and otherwise. Anything else is auxiliary, and that we do want to reach people, of course. That should be motivated by love and servanthood. But we're not trying to seduce people. We're certainly not trying to bait and switch people. And we also want to never lose sight of the fact that we are seducible ourselves. We want to have, in other words, we want to have our feet anchored in the culture of Christ and his church rather than the wider culture. And I think we're reaching a time now where that it is more important to focus on our identity in Christ together corporately as a people and in our own lives than it has ever been before in U.S. culture, because a lot of people are just losing themselves.
Yeah, so I think, Cameron, on that spot there, we've talked about this before, but this is my Grandpa Rittenhouse theory here. He said that if you look at the future of discipleship, it'll almost have to be residential, like a good addiction recovery program is, in the sense that people will be longing for real human contact and thinking about how do I live like in real community with real human relationships, but also not have the skills to do that because we've been here's the thing that is interesting and terrifying all at the same time is most of the stuff that we see through our screens, we think of it as entertaining, not recognizing that it is more educational than we think. It's more formative. And so I would say, okay, let's say we're scrolling through YouTube shorts, watching people eat cinnamon, bad idea. But what's the value there? What's being taught? What's being learned other than don't stick a spoonful of cinnamon in your mouth? Is that just entertainment or is it forming? It's like anytime that I'm choosing to look at something or not choosing to look at something, that is a formative element of what I'm doing. So I think there is a a point in the future where we will have to begin saying no to looking at certain things in order to focus on other things. We can't have it
Yeah.
all. I think I sense that in my own life. I was just saying, like, there's a lot of really good and interesting stuff. Um, I have more books in my office right now than I will get read by the end of next year. Like, I'm just surrounded by
Sure.
opportunities to look at something, and it's totally impossible. And so I'm going to have to decide what to focus on relationally and with my time. And I think you can run down the tech road far enough to see that the tech road isn't going to take you in a direction that you want to go as a human. And then you're going to have to start choosing what you're going to say no to in order to prioritize things that you think are healthy and life-giving and right, even if they aren't quite as glitzy and glittery and flashy. So what does it look like to live life without the blinking lights? I think there's a lot of room there for the church to lean into that.
All right. So 2 observations here. First of all, number 1, certain doors need to close. So what do I mean by that? If if you have to keep a cultural door open, so to speak, at the cost of your Christian witness, the cost is too high. We haven't in the past, when we've had more cultural stability and when we've still had more traces of Christendom in our culture, it's been possible to work toward those opportunities of open doors in key arenas of culture, and it's largely a good thing. And I'm not saying positive cultural influence isn't a good thing. Of course it is. I don't think I even have to make that point. Of course it is. But if you have trends, forms of technology that militate against a fulsome exposition of the gospel, then you've got a problem. It's very obvious. Now, it's hard for us as Americans because we're hardwired to be pragmatic about this. And we need to go with what works. No, we need to go with what is right. And if that means we lose some influence, so be it. You don't want to gain influence for the wrong reasons.
Well, hang on here, Cameron.
So I'll pause there for a second.
Yeah. Can we say this, that Christianity only expresses itself physically? And technology is not a good platform for doing that. But I think we have a theological issue here when we think that Christianity is a set of ideas or beliefs to be communicated, not a way of life to replicate. Then you can be seduced into thinking that technology is going to be a way for you to multiply the impact of your faith. And that's not how it works.
Well, Nathan,
so there might be a theological realignment that needs to happen here too, to say the physical part of, like, your Facebook friends can't bring you chicken noodle soup when you're sick or help you move your couch, right? Like, what Jesus was saying only works out in a physical manifestation.
Well, remember when this debate was very live because of COVID-19, the question was communion. Can you do communion online?
No.
And the most
other questions?
No. No. I think most people on an intuitive basis kind of knew already. There were a lot of debates, but of course, all of the most theologically incisive and sound theologians were unified and saying, no, absolutely no. And so, yeah, can you do church online? No. Yeah, no, you can't. Sorry if that ruffles some feathers. Can you love
your neighbor online?
Will it close down opportunity?
Yeah, no.
No. Maybe, rough equivalent in some, to a very limited degree, possibly. But we'll lose, we lose numbers and lose opportunities. Yeah, but some of those opportunities are good opportunities to lose. There are certain things that should be shut down.
But there are numbers that don't mean anything either. I guarantee you I can go online and find a chess move that has 15 million views. What does that have to do with the church?
Yes.
Like, that's a lot of views for a chess move video. But what does that have to do with? So the numbers are there, but they're not meaningful numbers, I guess is what I'm saying. So having a church with 70 people that you actually know and love is better than having an online influence of 70 million with dumb stuff that doesn't change anybody's lives.
So here's the other thing that's going on, though. So what I said, it was somewhat sobering. Certain doors have to close, but here's what's actually happening. Nathan, your church is growing. My church is growing. the church we just spoke at this past weekend is growing.
The other
And
church I spoke at this
growing in
weekend
big
is
ways
growing.
to the point where it's yeah. So these are good where they're having a hard time staffing nurseries and all. They have all the good problems to have. They've got a lot of people from who, in my case, my neck of the woods here at these, and in my theological neighborhood, a lot of people who are not necessarily Presbyterian. So onboarding them theologically is a little bit of it. So these are all good problems to have. So why are our churches growing? Well, if what we've said is true and people are indeed very thirsty for real human community and connection, well, one place where they ought to be able to go, where that is timelessly available, is the house of God. This is the church.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And
but hang on, Cameron.
so-
hang on. Wait.
Yeah.
The church we were at does not have a strategy. Like all of the churches that I know that are growing wholesomely do not have a strategy for growth.
Oh, no.
I think this is the
none
work.
of these churches
We want to say
are trying.
This is the
Yeah.
work of God, I think, and also something that's always been there that people are now just remembering and recognizing. Like, oh, I need this in my life. So it's not like, oh, Nathan and Cameron speak at churches that have great social media campaigns and are seeker friendly and have low standards, so that more
No.
people will come and drop off their kids for the candy festival. That's not how this is. That would
No.
that would be falling
No.
back into the fake authenticity of the falseness of the reality TV show. That's not what we're talking about.
Not at all. No, that's, in fact, it's almost as though some of these churches are, the one where we just spoke is charmingly almost anti-relevant in some ways. And that's, I think, one of its biggest draws, ironically, because it's so real. But let me just put it like this. If this is indeed the need in the case, why would we want to embrace something like AI writing our sermons or assisting with our sermons? I can soften the language a little bit. Why would we want to employ artificial means to try to reach people who are absolutely desperate for human contact?
Oh, also, here's the second
It's worth
question.
carefully reflecting on that.
No, I'm going to skip that one, even though it's a good one. No, it's no. So but here's the thing. What we're assuming, though, in that model, Cameron, is that the pastor is the one who reaches everybody. And therefore, they have to have excellence and they have to be so good that they can compete in the technosphere in the world of ideas. What you and I are talking about is the role that you have as not the pastor in your church to connect with the people around you in real tangible ways. So this is your kids playing together in the backyard. This is who you're standing around and talking to at the piano recital. I mean, so the vision of the church that I think Christ very clearly had in mind, and we're pushing us toward here, is that the church is really done by all of the members, not a highly specialized subset that you pay in order to represent you publicly.
Amen.
Well.
Yep.
So the technology is only useful in a very, very, very tiny. Now, I'm not saying technology is bad. Like, okay, so my wife is in however many little WhatsApp or chat groups of people sharing prayer requests and whatever. Fine, like those are people that we like really do life together, and them. So I'm not a Luddite and all of that. I'm just saying that there's a far more equalizing opportunity available to you, non-social media influencer, in growing the church. Then we just need to stop and say that.
Amen. We'll come back to these themes again because they're such a feature of our age. I think one closing thought is that in the past, this is just a very raw thought, but in ancient Greece, you had peripatetics, who, there's a word for you, who would essentially just, wander teaching people, Socrates style, some of them. It seems to be that one of the places those people show up now is on YouTube. And so you have some of these really deep thinkers who have YouTube channels. And I'm thinking of people, not just like Jordan Peterson, but Ian McGilchrist and Malcolm Guite. These people who are very skilled scholars, pastors themselves and priests and poets and writers. And essentially their YouTube channel is you just sit and just hear them open up wisdom and talk about life and how we're living and trying to make sense of our world and our moment. So it's just, again, the landscape has changed in some drastic ways, but the human needs remain universal and the same.
Yep.
The deep need to understand and to connect and to find meaning and significance in our experiences, and to get real wisdom on this rather than just information, but wisdom. There's a difference there.
You can't clever tech your way out of human nature.
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll leave it there.
That said,
yeah.
But thank you for tuning in via your various technologies to our podcast, which, in case you missed it in all of this, is Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events in Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.